Imagine this. I've just wrapped up 4 exhausting months in Washington, D.C., the kind where every day is buried under fluorescent lights, endless reports, and people who think a policy memo can fix human stubbornness. Finally, I point my truck south, hauling a horse trailer behind me, eager for the wide skies of Texas. The closer I get to my family ranch, the more I feel the air shift, lighter, wilder, carrying that faint scent of dust and sage. But instead of the welcome sight of a quiet gate, I'm greeted by chaos. 3 squad cars block the entrance like I'm some wanted fugitive. Their lights throw red and blue shadows across the gravel, turning the familiar into something surreal. And standing right there, with the posture of a queen waiting to be crowned, is Karen Whitmore. Arms crossed, chin lifted, a smirk stretched across her face as if she's already rehearsed the headline. Local hero evicts trespasser. She's bouncing slightly on her toes, vibrating with self-satisfaction, the way a kid might fidget before unwrapping a present. Only this present is me, and she thinks she's finally caught the big one. The deputy approaches slowly, hat in hand, wearing the look of a man who knows the situation is ridiculous but has no choice but to play along. "Sir," he says carefully, "we've received a trespassing complaint. This lady claims you don't belong here." For a moment I don't speak. I let the words hang in the air, absurd as they sound. Then I glance at the gate where a wrought iron sign proudly declares Whitehawk Ranch established 1887. That sign has outlived droughts, floods, and half a dozen county commissioners. I look back at Karen, who moved into the neighborhood barely 90 days ago, and finally I answer, "Officer, let me introduce you to the woman who just called the cops on the man who oversees every homeowners association in America." The deputy blinks, clearly unprepared for that twist. Karen's smirk falters, slipping away like ice under a Texas sun. And that's where this story truly begins. To understand how a woman with a clipboard obsession managed to summon 3 squad cars to my front gate, you need the whole picture. My name is Garrett Whitehawk, and 4 months earlier I had buried my father on this very soil. He'd been the 3rd generation to run the Whitehawk Ranch, land first broken by my great-grandfather with nothing more than stubborn hands, a mule, and faith that dry earth could bloom if you fought hard enough. 2,400 acres of hills, mesquite trees, and cattle operations that fed not just our family but half the county economy. Losing him was like losing the anchor that kept everything steady. Yet even while I was grieving, duty called. Alongside ranching, I'd spent years climbing the ladder at the Federal Housing Authority, the agency that keeps homeowner associations honest, or tries to. When Dad passed, my promotion came through, summoning me to Washington as a regional oversight director. My task, ensure that HOA across 5 states followed the law instead of bullying residents into submission. Little did I know I'd be facing the exact same kind of bully back home. While I was away, my foreman Buck Henley was running the ranch. Buck had been part of this place longer than most fences. Skin leathered by sun, eyes sharp from decades of watching weather roll in, and humor dry enough to cut through dust storms. He was the kind of man who didn't rattle easy, but even Buck's patience was tested when Sagebrush Estates sprouted down the road. The developers pitched it as authentic Western living, which in plain English meant California transplants paying a fortune for oversized houses near working cow pastures, then complaining about the smell of manure and the sound of cows at dawn. Enter Karen Whitmore. She'd rolled in from San Diego, where rumor had it she'd left behind a trail of neighbor feuds long enough to fill a court docket. Barely had the moving truck doors swung open before she declared herself Community Standards Coordinator. Though nobody had elected her, Buck described her best. She's like a caffeinated chihuahua, always yapping, always snapping, and somehow convinced she's running the place. At first, her antics sounded more comical than dangerous. She patrolled daily with a clipboard and measuring tape, recording everything she could see from the road. Buck caught her photographing our cattle, scribbling notes as if she were preparing a doctoral thesis on bovine bathroom schedules. Soon, the certified letters began arriving in stacks, complaints about unpleasant agricultural odors, a translation, manure smells like manure, unsightly equipment storage, our tractors, apparently, offended her aesthetic, and noise violations. Who could have guessed cows moo? She filed them with the county, citing herself and a few neighbors she'd strung, armed into signing. Buck relayed all of this to me over scratchy phone calls while I sat in a D.C. office drowning in HOA regulations.
"Boss,"
he said once, "this woman's got timestamps of our feeding schedule. She's measuring dust clouds with some contraption, even called the county claiming our access road violates her property setbacks. Mind you, her house is barely 50 feet from our fence, while that road's been there since Sam Houston was in diapers." I laughed at first, but when I returned home, I found 17 complaint letters stacked on my desk and a community compatibility hearing already scheduled. Karen wasn't just a nuisance, she was waging a full-on campaign. My first face-to-face with her happened at Kowalski's feed store, a place that smells like hay and leather and feels like home the second you step in. I was picking up mineral supplements when she cornered me, hand extended like we were meeting at a charity gala. "You must be Mr. Whitehawk," she said, voice sweet as saccharin. "I'm Karen Whitmore, community standards advocate for Sagebrush Estates. We simply must discuss modernizing your ranch to better fit our neighborhood aesthetic." Behind her, old Marty Kowalski tried to stifle a grin, pretending to organize bags of salt, but clearly savoring the spectacle. I looked at Karen, porcelain veneer smile, manicured nails gleaming under the fluorescent light, and replied evenly, "Ma'am, this ranch was here long before your neighborhood was more than a developer's dream. We operate within every legal right we have." She chuckled like a teacher humoring a slow student. "Oh, I understand the historical sentiment, but times change. Property values, you know. I have extensive connections in county planning. I'm confident we can find solutions that work for everyone." The way she said solutions made it sound like surrender. For 20 minutes, she rattled on about harmony, appearances, and how agriculture should bend to suburban tastes. Never once did she ask about the ranch's history, our rights, or the community we'd supported for generations. She assumed I'd roll over because Queen Karen had spoken. That evening, I sat on the porch my father had built, bourbon in hand, watching storms flicker across the horizon. The county had scheduled a compatibility hearing, thanks to Karen's constant petitions. She wanted our cattle road moved, our equipment hidden, and our feeding schedule altered to avoid disturbing her dinner parties. I just smiled into the lightning, lit sky. She had no idea she'd picked a fight with the one man in the country who could bring her entire HOA crashing down. Karen wasted no time escalating her crusade. Within weeks, she transformed from a lone complainer into the self-appointed general of a miniature army. She created something called the Sagebrush Estates Property Values Committee, which sounded official but was nothing more than Karen, a retired banker named Bryce who obsessed over pennies, and Donna, a former city council member from Phoenix who had apparently fled bureaucracy only to recreate it in Texas. Buck's security cameras even caught Bryce arriving at Karen's kitchen one evening with a portable projector, a laser pointer, and a stack of charts like they were planning D-Day instead of harassing a ranch that had been operating since the 19th century. The irony of it all only deepened when Karen dug into my background online and discovered that I worked for the Federal Housing Authority. In her imagination, that meant I was some crooked government agent shielding ranchers. She told her committee, loud enough for Buck's listening ears to catch, "We'll take this straight to Washington. He's biased, and I have contacts who can go over his head." What she didn't realize was that those contacts would soon be very interested in her HOA own compliance failures. While she schemed about toppling me, my attorney, Sarah Olivia, was quietly conducting a title search that revealed something beautiful: agricultural easements. My grandfather had explained them when I was 12, permanent legal shields protecting existing farms from residential complaints. Every letter Karen filed, every noise complaint about cows mooing at dawn, actually strengthened our case by documenting long-standing operations. Better still, Sarah unearthed Karen's history: 3 states, 4 different neighborhoods, all ending in identical disputes. When I called one of her former neighbors in San Diego, the woman laughed until she wheezed. "Oh God, you've got Karen now. She tried to get our mariachi band arrested for noise, called immigration on our gardener, and filed 17 complaints about our dogs barking. We don't even have dogs. We had one cat." Meanwhile, Karen was doubling down. She hired an Austin law firm specializing in nuisance abatement, which is basically legal bullying in a fancy suit. Their letter threatened us with lawsuits claiming diminished property values and demanded that we stop ranch operations within 200 yards of her subdivision. They even calculated the cost of compliance, $340,000 in so-called improvements to make our working ranch fit suburban sensibilities. Karen's obsession reached new heights. She prowled the fence line with decibel meters at dawn, measured dust with handheld devices, climbed ladders to photograph our equipment yard as though she were conducting military reconnaissance. Buck caught her once shrieking and bolting for her SUV when Bessie, one of our friendliest heifers, wandered over curiously while Karen was busy measuring fence height. "Boss," Buck reported through barely contained laughter, "we've got video of her being chased off by a cow that just wanted a scratch. This is better than cable TV." But for Karen, it wasn't entertainment. She rallied neighbors into her rural reform campaign, set up a Facebook group, and began posting staged photographs of perfectly ordinary ranch activities as if they were evidence of environmental crime. Cows eating grass, tractors hauling hay, calves running in the pasture. To her, these were scandalous. The community's patience wore thin quickly. Marty at the feed store banned her after she demanded to inspect delivery trucks. Rita, who ran the county's best diner, told her that her dress code for diners' suggestion could be filed somewhere the sun doesn't shine. Karen had complained that Rita's chicken and dumplings were too ethnically aromatic, which in Texas is the sort of insult that can get you laughed clear out of town. Her legal campaign escalated, but at the same time her credibility collapsed. Residents of Sagebrush Estates began realizing that every complaint she filed triggered not just hearings against us, but scrutiny of their own community. Marcus Webb, county planning director and my dad's old fishing buddy, reviewed the agricultural easement and nearly spilled coffee down his shirt from laughing. "Garrett," he told me, "her complaints are legally meaningless, but let her push. It'll be educational for the whole county." And educational it became. Every document Karen submitted built a stronger case for our ranch's protection. Every meeting she organized exposed her own HOA violations, unpermitted fences, faulty drainage, buildings that exceeded height restrictions. She was unwittingly digging her own legal grave. Karen's little crusade should have fizzled out under the weight of its own absurdity, but instead she doubled down like a gambler chasing losses. By the time the county scheduled the neighborhood compatibility hearing, she was convinced her color, coded charts and dramatic PowerPoint slides would bring our century-old ranch to its knees. She strutted around Sagebrush Estates like a mayor without an election, promising neighbors that soon the eyesores and agricultural disturbances next door would be corrected by law. What she didn't know was that every agency she contacted was already circling her subdivision, not because of us, but because of the regulatory shortcuts her developer had taken. My attorney Sarah had uncovered a gold mine. The original permits for Sagebrush Estates required a 200-foot buffer zone between any house and agricultural land, sound barriers to limit noise, and drainage systems designed to work with our pastures. Not one of those obligations had been fulfilled. The developer had gone bankrupt halfway through construction, dumping all those requirements onto the HOA itself, which meant Karen, as the self-appointed enforcer, had unknowingly put herself at the center of a compliance disaster. While she measured cow pies and took pictures of tractors, the county inspector was discovering drainage violations, unpermitted fences, and illegal home expansions throughout her neighborhood. The irony was almost too rich. Meanwhile, Karen's tactics escalated from annoying to bizarre. She launched a Facebook page called Millfield County Rural Reform, filled with glossy photos of my cattle grazing under blue skies as though they were evidence of criminal behavior. She wrote captions accusing us of environmental damage and visual pollution, insisting that a working ranch was incompatible with modern suburban living. Her posts drew more laughter than support, but she was too wrapped up in her campaign to notice. Buck called me one morning, barely containing his laughter. "Boss, she's out there again, taking pictures of the bulls. I swear she's got more documentation on our herd than the Department of Agriculture." At the same time, Karen's paranoia began slipping into dangerous territory. She blocked one of our feed deliveries at the subdivision entrance, demanding to inspect the cargo like some self-appointed border guard. Another time, Buck caught her crouched behind the fence with a telephoto lens, photographing our family while we worked the horses. The sheriff's deputies grew weary of her calls. By the third time they had to explain agricultural easement laws to her, they started giving me apologetic looks that said, "We know she's crazy, but she's your problem." Turning point came when Sarah discovered financial records showing that Sagebrush Estates had received federal tax incentives during development. That meant their HOA fell under the exact jurisdiction I oversaw in my federal job. Karen had been trying to build a case against me for abusing authority, but what she had really done was hand me the power to open a federal investigation into her own community. Her complaints had triggered the one man in America who had the legal authority to dismantle her HOA if they failed compliance. The trap was closing, and she didn't even see it. The county hearing arrived with all the tension of a courtroom drama. Karen came armed with binders, poster boards, and a slideshow complete with ominous background music. She clicked through graphs, photos of cows grazing, charts of dust levels, and dramatic captions about declining property values. To her, this was a crusade to save civilization. To everyone else in the room, it looked like satire. I waited until she'd burned through her performance before calmly stepping forward, holding nothing more than a folder of legal documents. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "this ranch has operated since 1887. What you've just witnessed is essentially a complaint about cows being cows and tractors being tractors." Laughter rippled through the audience. I explained agricultural easements, presented records of our historical operations, and then revealed the development permits requiring a buffer zone and environmental compliance that Sagebrush Estates had never fulfilled. The room shifted instantly. Suddenly, Karen's campaign wasn't about us at all. It was about her own community's failure to follow the law. The planning director, Marcus Webb, confirmed it for everyone present. "These complaints are legally meaningless. The White Hawk Ranch is fully protected, but Sagebrush Estates will need to answer for its noncompliance." Karen's porcelain smile cracked, but she doubled down, shouting that I was intimidating residents with my federal power. I didn't need to say a word. The documents spoke for themselves. From that point forward, the tide of public opinion turned against her. Neighbors who had tentatively supported her began to back away. Bryce, the pinching banker, resigned from her so-called committee when he realized the HOA could be liable for hundreds of thousands in compliance costs. Donna, the former council member, quietly admitted she'd been misled and announced she was moving back to Phoenix. Karen was left isolated, still convinced she was the hero of her own story, but everyone else saw her as the problem. The irony continued piling up. During my federal training modules, I learned that HOA, which benefited from federal funding, could be subjected to enhanced oversight, including audits of finances and enforcement of original permit obligations. Sagebrush Estates had not only received tax incentives, they'd also failed to file required annual reports for 2 consecutive years. In bureaucratic terms, that meant they were operating illegally as an unregulated entity. Every step Karen took to draw attention to us was instead throwing her HOA under a microscope, and while she scrambled to prove we were a nuisance, investigators were quietly cataloging her own community's violations. Karen's desperation pushed her into stranger behavior. She filed reports with the Postal Service about our access road being unsafe for mail delivery, though our mail carrier had driven it for 37 years without incident. She called the IRS suggesting our ranch was a hobby farm hiding tax fraud, a laughable claim considering we had consistent profit records spanning generations. She even tried bribing one of our seasonal workers, offering $50 for dirt on supposed illegal practices. When Miguel, Buck's nephew, told her the only thing we dumped was love on our cattle, she stormed away as if insulted by honesty. By now, her neighbors were fed up. Families that had moved to sagebrush estates for peace and quiet found themselves living in the middle of a circus. Karen's constant complaints had invited scrutiny from county inspectors, environmental agencies, and even state regulators. Notices began piling into her neighbors' mailboxes. Compliance reviews, permit investigations, warnings about drainage violations. The very property values Karen claimed to protect were plummeting because of her crusade. The breaking point came when a local reporter, Jake Morrison, started digging into the situation. Karen had pitched him a sensational story about a federal employee abusing power to bully innocent homeowners. But Morrison, an old-school journalist with a nose for hypocrisy, uncovered her trail of harassment across 3 states. Instead of running her narrative, he published an expose titled "When Neighbors Go Too Far." The piece detailed her history of frivolous lawsuits, her campaign of complaints against harmless activities, and the mounting legal trouble facing sagebrush estates. Overnight, Karen became less of a community watchdog and more of a punchline. Yet, incredibly, she didn't quit. Instead, she escalated, organizing a so-called emergency HOA meeting where she proposed a special assessment, $12,000 per household, to fund legal action against our ranch. That meeting imploded spectacularly. Residents who were already drowning in compliance notices shouted back at her, demanding to know why they should bankrupt themselves to chase a feud they hadn't signed up for. Some stormed out, others threatened to sue her personally, and by the end of the night she was standing alone with her PowerPoint slides and a shrinking circle of allies. What Karen never grasped was that she had turned her fight into a national example. My role as a federal oversight director meant I had the ear of lawmakers drafting reforms for HOA accountability. Our story was exactly the kind of real-world case study they needed. By the time Congress scheduled hearings on HOA oversight, I was invited to testify, and Sagebrush Estates was front and center in my presentation. Karen thought she was exposing corruption. In reality, she had handed me the perfect platform to push for stronger protections for agricultural land against suburban encroachment. Karen's campaign had already shifted from nuisance to obsession, but in Section 3 of this saga, things tipped into outright self-destruction. By now she had burned through neighbors' patience, law enforcement's goodwill, and even her own husband's support, yet she kept digging. She began following my truck into town, parking outside our property for hours with binoculars, and creating fake social media accounts to smear the ranch with wild conspiracy theories about federal corruption and illegal operations. Most people who stumbled across those posts assumed they were parody, the ravings of someone with too much time and not enough common sense. But for us, it crossed a line from irritation into harassment. That was when my attorney, Sarah, filed for a restraining order, armed with hours of Buck's security camera footage showing Karen measuring fence lines at dawn, photographing cattle through slats, and blocking our delivery trucks as though she were a border guard. The sheriff's office, tired of being dragged into her drama, quietly recommended stalking charges. Even as the legal system tightened around her, Karen clung to her crusade. She pitched a story to Channel 7's investigative unit, claiming I was abusing federal authority to terrorize her subdivision. She edited video footage to emphasize dust clouds and the sound of our cattle feeding at sunrise, presenting it as proof of harassment. But the reporter, Jake Morrison, wasn't fooled. He interviewed former neighbors from California and Arizona, all of whom painted the same picture, a woman who had made conflict her full-time hobby. His broadcast, titled "When HOA Go Wrong, A Texas Tale," aired during sweeps week and reached thousands of viewers. Instead of exposing corruption at the ranch, it showcased Sagebrush Estates' permit violations, financial mismanagement, and Karen's pattern of harassment. The fallout was immediate. The HOA board, already drowning in compliance orders, voted unanimously to remove her from leadership. Residents, who had once been too intimidated to oppose her, now turned openly hostile. Some even considered legal action against her personally, furious that her antics had triggered fines, special assessments, and property value drops. At the same time, county officials delivered their own hammer, a 90-day deadline for the HOA to correct all permit violations or face legal action. That meant hundreds of thousands in required improvements, costs that would land squarely on the shoulders of already struggling homeowners. Karen, who had promised to protect their property values, had instead bankrupted them. Her personal life unraveled in parallel. Her husband, Dave, finally admitted they were drowning in debt from unpaid California taxes and prior lawsuits. He pleaded with her to stop, but she was too deep in her crusade to listen. Their adult children stopped visiting, embarrassed by her public meltdowns. Isolation hardened her resolve instead of softening it. She escalated into dangerous stunt, tailgating my truck on county roads, confronting me at the courthouse steps, even screaming accusations into news cameras about government conspiracy. It all backfired spectacularly when courthouse security footage caught her violating the restraining order, leading to her arrest. The same woman who once tried to have me charged with trespassing on my own land now stood before a judge accused of criminal stalking. Meanwhile, the national spotlight grew brighter. My congressional testimony used Sagebrush Estates as a textbook case of HOA abuse and regulatory failure. Lawmakers seized on the story as proof of why stronger accountability measures were needed. For once, rural communities had a seat at the table, and the conversation was no longer about whether ranches should adapt to subdivisions, but whether subdivisions had the right to disrupt agriculture that predated them by more than a century. Karen unintentionally had given us the perfect platform. Karen's downfall came not with a single blow, but with a steady collapse of everything she had built on arrogance and obsession. By the time her restraining order violation put her in handcuffs outside the courthouse, she had lost her position in the HOA, her reputation in the county, and the last shreds of credibility she thought she possessed. Her mugshot appeared in the same newspaper that featured our ranch on the front page for receiving heritage preservation recognition, a contrast so sharp that even lifelong skeptics shook their heads in disbelief. She had once tried to have me arrested for trespassing on land that had belonged to my family for over a century. Now she was the one facing criminal charges for stalking a federal employee. It was poetic justice, the kind that doesn't need exaggeration to feel like a fable. Meanwhile, the wheels of reform turned faster than even I expected. My testimony before the congressional subcommittee lit a fire under lawmakers who were already frustrated with HOA overreach. They adopted key recommendations from my report: mandatory disclosure of development obligations to all homebuyers, stronger agricultural protections in federally incentivized communities, and harsher penalties for frivolous harassment complaints. For the first time in decades, rural voices were not just heard but written into policy. Across the nation, farmers and ranchers sent letters thanking us, saying our fight had given them hope that their way of life could survive suburban encroachment. Locally, the county designated White Hawk Ranch an agricultural heritage site, providing permanent protection and new opportunities for tourism. Heritage tours brought in visitors who wanted to experience real ranching instead of sanitized Western-style living brochures. School field trips doubled, 4-H programs expanded, and even the local Chamber of Commerce passed a resolution celebrating the ranch as a cornerstone of community identity. Property values in the area actually rose, proving the exact opposite of what Karen had claimed. Sagebrush Estates, on the other hand, drowned under the weight of its own violations. The HOA was forced to levy massive special assessments, bankrupting several families and driving others to sell at heavy losses. Houses sat empty, weeds creeping through manicured lawns that had once been advertised as luxury Western living. Under new leadership, the HOA issued a formal apology to our family and agreed to cooperative arrangements, but by then, the damage to their reputation was irreversible. Karen herself fared even worse. Her husband filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and exhaustion from years of legal battles. Her children cut ties completely, humiliated by her public meltdowns that had gone viral across social media. With debts mounting and no community to defend her, she fled the state, leaving behind foreclosed property, unpaid fines, and a cautionary tale that spread far beyond Texas. She became a case study in HOA training seminars across the country, a name invoked whenever instructors wanted to warn new board members about how one person's obsession could destroy an entire neighborhood. In some circles, people even coined a phrase, "Don't go full Karen." While her world crumbled, ours flourished. The ranch earned Century Farm designation, joining an elite group of operations that had survived through generations of droughts, recessions, and cultural change. We expanded our educational programs, launched conservation projects with Texas A&M, and even created a scholarship fund for agricultural students. Our beef and honey found new markets through agritourism, boosting revenue and strengthening ties with local businesses. The county's annual Heritage Festival moved to our ranch, attracting tourists and pouring money into the local economy. For me personally, the journey had come full circle. What started with grief over my father's death and frustration over leaving the ranch had turned into a chance to honor his legacy while shaping national policy. The land he taught me to love was not only safe but thriving. The community he cherished rallied around us, stronger than ever, and the bully who once threatened all of it had undone herself without us lifting more than a legal document in defense. Sometimes the best revenge really is patience, letting people tie their own rope while you stand aside and wait. On quiet evenings now, I sit on the porch with my wife Sarah, watching our children chase fireflies across the yard while the cattle graze in the fading light. Tour buses roll past the gate for evening programs, and the sheriff waves as he drives by. No sirens, no trespass complaints, just peace. The ranch is alive, the community is stronger, and the lessons will outlast us all. If there's one truth I've carried from this ordeal, it's simple: always research before you buy property, respect the history of the land you move next to, and never underestimate the power of a community united against entitlement. Karen thought she was David fighting Goliath, but in the end she was just Goliath swinging wildly until she fell on her own sword, and that, perhaps, is justice at its finest.